Hello, welcome to the Wire Podcast, a podcast that provides the best content about all things sports. I'm Ryan McCrary, and on today's episode, I'm going to start by talking about the first round of this year's college football playoffs. I'm going to go through all of the first round games, and I also want to talk about the media's reaction to the blowouts. There were a lot of blowouts in the first round, and the media was not happy about that. After I talk about that and talk about the first round of the college football playoffs, I'm going to talk about Victor Wembanyama, his rise into becoming one of the top players in the league. I want to talk about the season he's having and why I believe he is quickly becoming arguably the best player in the world. And lastly, to close out this episode, I'm going to do something that I don't usually do. And I'm going to talk about a movie that I saw recently, Carry On. It's a movie that was released around Christmas time on Netflix. It's a Netflix original. I watched this last night on Christmas Day, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. So we're going to close out the podcast by talking about that movie, and I'm going to give my thoughts about it. But that's what we have on tap for today's episode. I hope you're excited. I know I am. And let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, let's get this show on the road. And before we get into any of the content, I want to wish y'all a Merry Christmas. Christmas is my favorite holiday. This is my favorite time of the year. I love this holiday. I love being able to get together with family and celebrate the birth of Jesus. It's awesome. I love it. And I also really enjoy being able to buy gifts for other people. But yeah, first off, just wanted to wish y'all a Merry Christmas. I hope it's been a great time celebrating this holiday with your friends and family. And I hope that everyone has a great New Year. Now we can go ahead and get into the content. I want to start today's episode by talking about the first round of this year's college football playoffs. And unfortunately, it wasn't great. Because all of the games were blowouts. They were all of the games were decided by a margin of at least double digits, which was disappointing. But we did see some strong performances from some teams, some of the higher ranked teams in these matchups. And so I wanted to go through all of these games and talk about what happened. And then after that, I want to talk about the media's reaction to the blowouts, because the media went nuts after some of these blowouts. And I want to talk about why some prominent members of the media were so upset. They were mainly upset about the rankings and what those rankings led to in terms of the results of these first round games. I want to talk about some solutions that people have brought up to kind of fix the rankings and fix some of the issues that people have with the rankings. And I want to talk about that as well. Let's go ahead and start by breaking down the matchup between Indiana and Notre Dame. Indiana was the 10th seed, Notre Dame the 7th seed, and Notre Dame absolutely dominated Indiana. Notre Dame won 27-17, and that final score does not accurately reflect how awesome Notre Dame played in this game, and how they controlled this game from start until about the fourth quarter. In the fourth quarter, Indiana was able to put together a few scoring drives to make the score close, but Notre Dame led 27-3 at one point, and so they were just absolutely dominant for most of this game until Indiana was able to put some points on the board at the end of this contest. And I want to shout out Notre Dame's defense, which played really, really well, averaging giving up negative 0.01 EPA per play and allowing a success rate of just 39%. Both of those numbers are excellent, very good marks. Their defense was dominant all game long. Indiana really had a hard time putting together, long, sustained drives with any consistency. They weren't able to really do that until the fourth quarter. Their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, who I am a huge fan of, struggled in this game. He didn't really play particularly well. Notre Dame was able to force, I don't know if they were able to force multiple turnovers. No, they did force an interception early in the game. And Curtis Rourke, let's look at his numbers real quick. He had 197 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 3 sacks. Not like an awful game. You could do much worse than this, but that's not the kind of game you want to have if you're going to try to take down a team like Notre Dame, who, in my opinion, is arguably the best team in the nation. I think they're probably like number 2 or number 3, up there with Texas and Ohio State. But this Notre Dame team is legit, and I think they showed it in this game. I also wanted to shout out Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame's running back, who was awesome in this game. Had 8 carries for 108 yards and 1 touchdown. Didn't get much usage as a runner, but he had a 98-yard touchdown early in the game, and that was huge. And that put Notre Dame on the board first and really kickstarted their success in this game. So shout out to Jeremiah Love. He played really well. One thing I wanted to note is that although Curtis Rourke wasn't very good in this game, I think you can argue that he outplayed Notre Dame's quarterback, Riley Leonard, who was not very good in this game. He had 195 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, averaged negative .02 EPA per play compared to Curtis Rourke's .14 EPA per play. I think Curtis Rourke and Riley Leonard were both not nearly good enough in this game. However, Notre Dame's defense was so dominant that the Fighting Irish were okay. But both of these quarterbacks really struggled in this matchup. But like I said, Notre Dame's defense was just too good. Indiana couldn't get much going in the passing game or the run game. They were really bad in both of these areas. But, Notre Dame put together a really strong performance to take down Indiana in the first round, and they move on to play the Georgia Bulldogs, which will be a huge matchup next Tuesday. All right, the next game I want to talk about is number 11 SMU versus number 6 Penn State. This was kind of similar to the Indiana-Notre Dame game, where I don't really feel like either team was that good offensively, but Penn State was dominant nonetheless, winning 38-10, and their defense was lights out in this game. Held SMU to 10 points, had a lot of turnovers forced in this game. I believe they forced 3 turnovers total. Kevin Jennings, SMU's quarterback, was horrific. He had so many bad throws. He had some inaccurate throws on big plays. I remember early on in this game, SMU went for it on 4th down. I don't know if they were in the red zone just yet. They were close to it, if not. And they decided to go for it on a 4th and short. I think it was 4th and 1, maybe a 4th and 2. Kevin Jennings was able to escape the pocket, could have run for the first down, and got it pretty easily. But he decided to throw to a wide open tight end in the end zone, and it was a very good decision. However, the throw was off. It was very inaccurate. It was behind the tight end. The tight end reached behind them to try to make the catch, but he was hit by a defender, and the ball fell incomplete. And on top of that, Kevin Jennings had some really bad turnovers. He had some throws where he wasn't seeing defenders, or throws were just off and inaccurate, and it led to picks. And so he just had a really bad game. It was not a good day for him. He really struggled. And he was, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons why SMU struggled so much offensively. And SMU's numbers on offense were really bad in this game. They had an EPA per play of negative .36, which is in the 4th percentile. A big reason why that number is so poor is because of the turnovers. And they threw 2 pick sixes. I forgot to mention that. 2 of Kevin Jennings' interceptions were pick sixes. And that is going to be a huge negative for any team's offense. And that is a big reason. That is probably the main reason why SMU's offensive production was so poor in this game. And what's funny is Penn State's offense wasn't good either. I mean, Penn State averaged negative .14 EPA per play, which ranks in the 23rd percentile. So their offense wasn't that good either. But their defense was so dominant. Their defense was, it put SMU's offense in a box. And their defense was able to score points itself, scoring 14 points total, which is huge. That's very big. And that's part of the reason why Penn State was able to win by such a significant margin. And another stat to point out Penn State's weird offense is they only averaged 5.23 yards per play, yet scored 38 points as a team. Obviously, some of that is coming from the defense, but that's just, it's crazy to think about. They were able to put so many points on the board despite their offense being pretty lackluster. I will say Penn State did perform really well on third downs and in the red zone. Their success rates in these situations were in the 80th percentile or above, which is very good. So that is one area where Penn State's offense was good. But the defense was the star of the show, forcing 3 turnovers, got 2 pick sixes, 3 sacks, and 12 tackles for a loss. And SMU's defense played well, but their offense just struggled too much and really shot themselves in the foot too often in this game, and that's why Penn State was able to win 38-10. If Penn State wants to, make a deep run in the playoff, I think they need to be way better offensively. Drew Aller, their quarterback, he struggled in this game. I did not think he was very good. The fact that Kevin Jennings was so terrible kind of covers that up, and I feel like people weren't really talking about Drew Aller's struggles enough, but he was bad. I mean, he completed 13 of 22 passes for 107 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 picks, and 3 sacks. That's not very good. He's got to be way more productive if they want to make a deep run, especially if they want to beat a team like Georgia or Notre Dame. They can't play this well or this way. If they do, they're going to lose to one of the top teams in the nation. But anyway, I do want to give a shout out to Penn State for winning its first round matchup in such dominant style. That was very impressive. All right, now let's move on and talk about number 12 Clemson versus number 5 Texas. Yeah, another game decided by at least double digits. This time Texas won 38-24. This was actually a much better game than all of the other first round matchups. The level of play in this game was just a lot better than what we were getting in all of the other matchups. Both of these teams performed fairly well on offense, which you can't really say for all of the other first round games, so that was nice to see. Texas was really good in this game, though. I thought Texas could potentially struggle a little bit in this game, and it looks like that might happen early on when Clemson scored, I believe, on its first drive to take a 7-0 lead. But then Texas scored 21 straight unanswered points to go up 21-7 in the first half. Clemson did make a big comeback to make the score 31-24 early in the fourth, but Texas was able to score a big rushing touchdown to seal the game, and so that was what decided this game, and Texas was able to win by 14. Texas was really good offensively. They averaged .10 EPA per play and had a success rate of 50%. That EPA per play ranks in the 64th percentile, and that success rate ranks in the 88th percentile. I want to give a huge shout out to the Longhorns running back Jaden Blue, and also their other running back, Quintrevion Winsner. Both of these guys had over 100 total rushing yards. Jaden Blue put together a few huge plays where he was able to display his elite speed, and both of these guys also had 2 rushing touchdowns. So both of those guys were dominant in this game and were instrumental in Texas's offensive success. Quinn Ewers didn't really do much in this game. He didn't really play well, but Texas's rushing attack was incredible. They had 306 total yards on the ground, averaged 6.65 yards per carry, and averaged .09 EPA per rush. And all of those numbers are excellent. Very, very good. I do want to give a huge shout out to Clemson. Their offense played well in this game, averaging .09 EPA per play, and had a success rate of 48%. That EPA per play is 62nd percentile, and that success rate is 80th percentile. So Clemson's offense was very good. They weren't very effective running the ball, but they did a really good job throwing the ball. Cade Klubnik, I thought, was very solid in this game, completing 26 of 43 passes for 307 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 3 sacks. He outplayed Quinn Ewers. I think that's very obvious. He played really well, so that was very impressive. He also added 10 carries for 34 yards on the ground. Once again, Cade Klubnik played well in this game. I thought he outplayed Quinn Ewers, but Clemson's inability to stop Texas's run game was what really hurt them in this game, and it's what allowed Texas to put up 38 points and run away with this game in the end. Clemson was able to make a nice comeback, which was cool to see, but Texas is a very good team on both sides of the ball, and they were just able to make a few more big plays in this game, which is what separated these two teams. All right, let's close out our breakdown on all of the first round games in this year's college football playoff by talking about number 9 Tennessee versus number 8 Ohio State. I thought this would end up being the best game of the week, but it was not. In fact, it was a terrible game because Ohio State actually showed up. I can't believe that a Ryan Day-led team actually showed up in a big game, but it happened. And Ohio State was absolutely dominant in its first-round matchup, winning 42-17, and they were dominant the whole way through. They went up 21-0 in the first quarter. Tennessee scored twice to make the score 21-10 at halftime, but Ohio State went to work in the second half to win by 25 points. The Buckeyes were dominant, and they were awesome on offense, averaging 0.2 EPA per play and having a success rate of 52%. Both of those marks are in the 80th percentile or above. Ohio State had some big-time performances from their offensive skill positions. Will Howard completed 24 of 29 passes for 311 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and had 0 sacks. Very impressive game from Howard. And then their run game was great, as Trevion Henderson had 10 carries for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then they had some really impressive performances from their receivers, including true freshman Jeremiah Smith, who caught 6 of his 6 targets for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was incredible in this game. Emeka Egbuka was very solid as well, catching 5 of his 7 targets for 81 yards. Now, Tennessee did not have a lot of success on offense. They were the opposite of Ohio State. The Volunteers were terrible on offense, averaging negative 0.05 EPA per play, and they had a success rate of just 43%. That EPA per play ranks in the 38th percentile, and that success rate ranks in the 59th percentile. That success rate is okay, but the EPA per play was well below average, and Nico Iamaleava was terrible. Like, I hate to be blunt, and I hate to sound mean, but he sucked. He was terrible in this game, completing 14 of 31 passes for 69 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 4 sacks. Point blank, he really struggled a lot in this game. Tennessee really struggled to get things going on offense. They were able to do so a little bit in the second quarter, but after that, their offense floundered. It fell apart, and so they continued to struggle. Nico, he had a rough game, which is unfortunate, but he's a young player. He'll get better. Hopefully, he'll improve after this, but yeah, the way he performed in this game was really disappointing. I know Tennessee fans had to be really frustrated by the way that he played because he just didn't show up in this game. He needed to be a lot better, and it just wasn't. Now, he was very productive as a rusher. He had 16 carries for 82 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So as a runner, Nico was great. But as a passer, he wasn't. His passing numbers were just really bad across the board. His impact in the run game was huge, and so that's great. That you love to see that. But it would have been a lot. It would have been a lot better if Nico was way more effective as a passer in this game, because that really held back Tennessee's offense. I want to give a huge shout out to Peyton Lewis, who had 10 carries for 77 yards for Tennessee. He played well. Surprisingly, Dylan Sampson only had 2 carries for 6 yards. I don't remember if he got hurt at all in this game or if he just wasn't very effective, but he wasn't very productive in this game, whatever the reason is for that. But yeah, those are my thoughts in this game. Ohio State played really well. If they continue to play like this, they have a good shot at winning the whole thing, at winning the national championship. Tennessee is a good team. They've got a really good defense. Their offense isn't quite as good as what we're used to seeing from Tennessee, but Tennessee does possess a very strong defense, and Ohio State didn't struggle to score whatsoever. So I thought that was very impressive. Ohio State's defense came to play, and I thought this was the kind of performance that you expect from, a team that is considered arguably the best team in the nation. And Ohio State definitely looked like the best team in the nation in this game, and I'm really interested to see if Ohio State can keep this up moving forward. All right, let's wrap up this segment by talking about the media's reaction to the first round of the college football playoff, because it was not pretty. And the reason why I say this is because there were a lot of members of the media, especially a few of ESPN's top college football analysts, who went on a warpath against the committee and against some of the lower seeded teams for the way they performed in the first round. I'm specifically talking about Kirk Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum, who both work for ESPN. After Indiana and SMU both lost in pretty ugly fashion, Kirk Herbstreit went on ESPN and talked about how Indiana was outclassed against Notre Dame and didn't deserve to make the playoff because of that, and basically kind of implied that Indiana proved that it didn't deserve to make the playoff by the way it performed against Notre Dame. And then Paul Feinbaum verbatim called Indiana and SMU frauds and indicated that the committee failed when it failed when coming out with the final rankings. Paul Feinbaum clearly disagrees with the final rankings, and I don't know if he said this on the podcast I was listening to or I saw a clip of, but I think it's pretty clear that Paul Feinbaum and Kirk Herbstreit are two people who believe that Alabama should have made the playoff. I do as well, but my reasoning is way different than Kirk Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum. Kirk Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum, based on what they have said, fall into a group of people who believe that the committee should prioritize teams who are generally viewed as better teams than other teams who may have better resumes than them. Because Kirk Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum appear to want the rankings to be more based on team strength rather than quality of each team's resume. Now, the rankings have always been more resume-based than team strength-based. I've done a lot of research into this, and the rankings generally correlate more to resume-based stats like strength of record rather than a team strength stat like FPI. And I think this shows that the committee generally ranks teams based on whether or not they deserve to be in the playoff, whether or not they are one of the best teams in the nation, if that makes sense. And I just really disagree with the way that Kirk Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum covered the first round of the playoff. I have a lot of disagreements, and I really dislike the way they covered it, because the way they had they almost sounded hateful in the way they covered Indiana and SMU. Yes, Indiana and SMU struggled, and it's fine to criticize those teams for it, but to declare that they are frauds is really weird. Like, that's weird to hear from a college football analyst at a huge network like ESPN. It's just odd. And both Herbstreit and Paul and Feinbaum are going to bang the drum for a team like Indiana to get in. And I get why they think that they are better than Indiana and SMU, sure. But I would argue that Alabama, its fans, and members of the media really should have a hard time complaining about Alabama getting in when Alabama lost 3 games, didn't make its conference championship, and had a few terrible losses against Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And yes, in my opinion, those are really bad losses, terrible losses. And I say that because I have a really high bar for teams making the playoffs, and I have a lot of respect for Alabama. And in my respect for them, I'm going to be honest when I evaluate its resume. And in my opinion, the loss to Vanderbilt and the loss to Oklahoma are both terrible losses. And because of that, I don't think it's a crime that Alabama didn't get in. Now, I do think they deserve to get in. I actually came out with my own rankings at the end of the season and after conference championship week, and I had Alabama at 10, I believe. But still, I recognize that Alabama had a really weird situation where the resume was still good, but they had 3 losses, didn't play in their conference championship game, and had a few really bad losses, and that hurt them. On the other hand, SMU won 11 games, made its conference championship game, and because of that, I believe the committee didn't want to, even though SMU lost in its conference championship game, I believe the committee didn't want to penalize them too much by knocking them out of the playoff field. For teams like Penn State and Texas, who also lost their conference championship games, their seeding was affected, but their standing in the playoff wasn't going to be affected. It wasn't like Penn State or Texas were in danger of being left out because it lost its conference championship. And I believe the committee took a similar approach when ranking SMU. And although SMU lost in the ACC championship game to Clemson, I bet the committee was never going to drop it out of the playoff unless SMU performed really poorly and lost by double digits. But that didn't happen. Therefore, I think SMU was probably going to be safe. And I probably disagree with ranking teams that way, which is why I had SMU behind Alabama in my rankings. I had SMU as, I believe, the first team out of the playoff. But still, I think the way the committee ranked teams was fine. I thought it was logically consistent in the end, and I didn't have a huge issue. I think it's fine to be like, I actually do think Alabama had a good enough resume, which is my take. But I recognize the warts in Alabama's profile, their resume, and why the committee went with SMU over Alabama. And I really don't think it's a crime against humanity that Alabama was left out. And Herbstreit and Feinbaum would obviously disagree with that. But yeah, I really hated the way that these two analysts covered the first round. I hated the way they reacted to Indiana and SMU losing. I thought the way they covered those teams was kind of nasty and disgusting. And I really don't like it when analysts are elitist to the point where they tear down non-elite programs like Indiana and SMU. People who do that make me wonder if they really, truly love the sport they cover. I love college football. Like, I watch college football every weekend. I come out with my own rankings that are based on stats and data. And I put a lot of effort into that. And I love the sport. And I try to defend these non-elite programs like Indiana and SMU. And I defended BYU for most of the season. I try to not be a huge jerk. and I try to not be elitist. But above all, I try to be objective. And I feel like Herbstreit and Feinbaum did not do that. I feel like they weren't objective. I feel like they were tearing down these non-elite programs when these teams didn't deserve it. And I really hate to see that. And I really hate to see analysts just do whatever they can to defend SEC teams and Big Ten teams as well, but mainly SEC teams because that's a huge issue right now. People will fight to their death for SEC teams, even if these teams don't really deserve it. And I really don't like that. And Herbstreit and Feinbaum do that way too often for my liking. And it sucks as someone who likes the sport. And I literally believe that I would provide better analysis of college football than Herbstreit and Feinbaum because my analysis would be based on research and it wouldn't be lazy. And Herbstreit and Feinbaum's comments after the first round were lazy and just reflective of people who don't actually love the sport. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's my take. One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is strength of schedule. After the rankings came out and after the first round games, people have been begging the committee to care more about strength of schedule in the future. I do want to make sure that people know that strength of schedule is a, let's see, what word do I want to use? Strength of schedule does not tell us anything about a way that a team performed. So the committee, in my opinion, should not put too much weight into this stat alone. Strength of schedule just tells us how difficult a team's schedule was, but it doesn't tell us anything about the way that a team performed against that schedule. And if the committee is going to put too much weight into this, I think it may cause them to rank bad teams highly, and that would be a big problem. For example, Purdue and Mississippi State this year ranked 6th and 2nd, respectively, in strength of schedule. Neither of these teams were very good. So just because their strength of schedule was high does not mean we need to rank them a lot higher than they should be. That's my main argument against strength of schedule. However, a stat like strength of record, which is ESPN's resume stat, is a stat that measures the impressiveness of each team's record based on the strength of schedule they play. The strength of record does incorporate strength of schedule and the quality of the opponents that each team plays. However, it also looks at each team's record and says, hey, how impressive is it that a team had this record considering the strength of their schedule? And so I would much rather have the committee weigh this stat heavily instead of strength of schedule. Strength of record is just way better than strength of schedule. It actually tells us how a team performed against their schedule. And so it incorporates strength of schedule, but also looks at how teams performed in terms of winning games. And the fact that I just said winning games also reminded me of what Kirk Herbstreit said after the first round. He talked about how he hopes the committee next year isn't influenced by social media and fringe fans who care too much, who only care about wins. This is something that he said. That's something that he said. I'm not putting words in his mouth. He said that. He said that people care too much about wins, which is a wild thing to say. That is unbelievable. The point of sports is to win games, and Kirk Herbstreit said people care too much about wins. That is absolutely hilarious. Kirk Herbstreit, you are a fool. You are so stupid. Like, I don't have any personal problems with Kirk Herbstreit or Paul Feinbaum, but Kirk Herbstreit is such a fool. God, what a man. What a man. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much of a rant. I feel like I've been rambling for a while, but those are my thoughts on the first round games of this year's college football playoff, as well as the media's reaction to these games and some of the issues that I had with the media's reaction. Those are my thoughts on all of that. Next up, we are going to be talking about Victor Wembanyama, the season he's having, and why I believe he is quickly becoming one of the top players in the NBA. All right, now let's talk about Spurs center Victor Wembanyama, who is having an absolutely insane season. I saw a lot of people talking about him after his performance on Christmas Day, in which he had, I believe he had 42 points, 18 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 4 blocks. Also shot 6 for 16 from 3, if I remember correctly. It was an insane performance. The Spurs did lose to the Knicks by 3 points, but it was an incredible performance on Christmas Day from Victor Wembanyama. He was awesome. And so I wanted to take a look at his production this season because he is having an incredible sophomore season. And I want to talk about how well he's been playing and really take a deep dive into how good he is relative to the other players in the NBA and how good he can become, because he is kind of exceeding my expectations a little bit, becoming a lot better quicker than I expected, and it's really impressive stuff. And so let's go ahead and dive in, take a look at, the way that he's performing this season. Right now, he is averaging around 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game also adding 1 steal and 4 block per contest, and he's averaging just 2 fouls committed and 4 turnovers per game. And he's doing all of this with a true shooting percentage of 61% with 48, 36, 88 shooting splits. Those shooting splits are insane. A 7'4" center shooting 36 from 3 and 88% at the free throw line is bonkers. That is nuts. And what's crazy is his shot diet. 50% of his shots are threes. That is not normal for a 7'4" center. And when you watch him play, it's crazy how willing Wemby is to shoot from distance. He is like a super high volume 3-point shooter, despite being one of the tallest players in the league. And he's really good at shooting threes. He's shooting 36% on high volume. That's very impressive for his position. And on top of this, he is shooting around 85% from 0 to 3 feet. So not only is Wemby a really great 3-point shooter, he's also an excellent finisher. And on top of this, he is carrying a huge load for the Spurs with a usage rate of 31.9%, and he's also averaging 33 minutes per game. Now, I will say, Wemby is not the best rebounder of all time. His rebounding numbers aren't bad by any means, but they are a little bit underwhelming for a 7'4" center who is very productive at erasing shots. His offensive rebound rate is 6.4%. His defensive rebound rate is 26.8%. And his total rebound rate is 16.8%. And I believe he is outside the top 10 in all of these stats. I believe that's right. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's true. And so his rebounding numbers aren't bad. They're good, but they aren't quite what you would expect from a guy this size. On the other hand, Wemby is also just wildly productive defensively. He has right now a steal rate of 2% and a block rate of 11%. He is so good at blocking shots. He leads the league in block rate, and I would love to know how many times he is going to lead the league in block rate by the end of his career. The number is going to be absurd. It's going to be insane, and I can't wait to see that. He's also been extremely impactful this year. There are a couple of impact metrics that I like to look at, one of those being box plus minus, the other being estimated plus minus. These are produced by 2 separate companies. Box plus minus is produced by Basketball Reference. This year, Wemby has a BPM of 7.8, which is 4th in the league. That is close to being like a clear MVP level player. And he also has a EPM of 5.8, which is 3rd. So by these metrics, Wemby has been a top 4 player in the NBA this season. And that's crazy to think about. A second-year player who is, I believe, 21 years old, already being a top 4 player by impact metrics is absurd. That is insane. And I wanted to point out how awesome Wemby has been in his last 7 games. In those 7 games, he is averaging 30 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 5 blocks per game on 49% shooting from the field. And in these games, he shot 40% from 3 on 10 attempts per contest. What? Like, that is so crazy. We have never seen a player like this. And I also wanted to point out that Wemby is also a pretty decent passer. He has an assist rate over 20% this year and a turnover rate that I believe is under 15%. And that just goes even further to describe how crazy the season is. I mean, this guy is nuts. He's crazy. Yeah, he has an assist rate of 21.2% and a turnover rate of 14.7%. Okay, sure. Yeah, the 7'4" center can just shoot threes whenever he wants and is great at protecting the rim and can pass. Yeah, okay. That's normal. And just to further show how awesome Wemby's impact has been, the Spurs are 15.1 points better per 100 possessions with Wemby on the court. And basically all of the Spurs lineups with Wemby on the floor have been positive this year. He is already an extremely impactful player on both ends of the floor, especially on defense. And you can make a good argument that Wemby is the best defender in the NBA already. And on top of that, he is an excellent offensive player. One of my biggest criticisms of Wemby last year was the fact that he wasn't great offensively and was far from it. Like, he wasn't that efficient as a scorer. And that was partially because he was so reliant on threes last year and wasn't quite a great three-point shooter. That has completely changed. He is a legitimately awesome long-distance shooter now, and that has completely changed how productive he's been offensively. He's a very good scorer in terms of volume and efficiency, despite having a pretty crazy shot diet for his size. He's a solid passer for a big man, a lethal shooter at 7'4". He has elite finishing numbers across the board. Wemby is going to be one of the best finishers in the NBA for a long time. He's a freakishly good lob threat. He is a wonderful rim protector in terms of contesting shots, eliminating rim attempts, and blocking shots. He's also a very productive defensive playmaker in terms of racking up steals and deflections. And he is awesome at being a defensive playmaker while not committing fouls, which is a criminally underrated skill, in my opinion. Now, he is a good but not great rebounder, partially because he plays on the perimeter a lot, but there are very few flaws in his game, other than his low free throw rate and his underwhelming offensive rebound rate. If Wemby ever starts to play on the interior a little bit more, can increase his free throw rate, and get his true shooting percentage up, he's going to be like the best player in the league someday. I feel very good about that. Nikola Jokic, in my opinion, is the best player in the league right now, and I feel very comfortable saying that. But Wemby has a big advantage over Jokic, and that is the fact that he is elite defensively. Jokic is not. Now, Jokic is arguably the best offensive player we've ever seen, and that gives him an advantage over Wemby. But if Wemby can combine elite, defensive player of the year caliber defense with top 10 to top 15, caliber offense, that's going to be a very special player, and that might be good enough for him to be a better, more impactful player than Nikola Jokic. Now, that's a high bar because Jokic is an all-time great player, and he's playing at that level year after year after year. But what we're seeing from Wemby is insane. This level of production is unbelievable, and I think he is already one of the best players in the NBA. Maybe it's a little bit early to say that he's one of the 5 best players in the NBA. That might be a bit too soon for that, but it's coming. I think we are not too far away from that. EPM has a dunksandthrees.com has a predictive version of their EPM metric, which is forward-facing, trying to look into the future rather than describing what has already happened in this season. And in this predictive EPM metric, Wemby ranks 7th in the NBA. And there's a site called Darko that has a plus-minus metric of its own that is supposed to be similar to the predictive EPM metric. And in this stat, Wemby ranks 2nd behind Nikola Jokic, which is crazy. So Wemby is already on the path to being one of the few top players in the league, and that's insane. That is truly unbelievable. Victor Wembanyama, I was a huge fan of his coming into the NBA. I thought he was a generational prospect, and he has proven me and pretty much everyone else who felt the same way. I mean, I don't know if anybody else felt differently about him. He's proving us right. he is a ridiculously good player. He had some struggles early on this season in terms of his efficiency offensively, but he's kind of fixed that a little bit. We'll see if that continues. If it does, yeah, he's going to be insane. He's going to be first team All-NBA, and he may even get some MVP votes. And that's how unreal he's been. Wemby, you are ridiculous. I love watching you play, and these numbers are out of this world. All right, let's close out today's episode by talking about a new Christmas movie that came out recently on Netflix. It's a Netflix original called Carry On, starring Taron Egerton and Jason Bateman. It's a thriller about a TSA agent. I don't want to give away too many spoilers in this review. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit because it has been extremely popular. I've seen a lot of people talking about it. I also saw something recently on social media that it is one of, if not the best performing Netflix original ever, which is extremely impressive. If it isn't already, it may be on pace to be the most, the best performing Netflix original, which is cool to see. But yeah, this is a very good movie. I know there's a lot of hype about it, and sometimes movies that get a lot of hype, especially Netflix originals, can turn out to not be that good. But I actually think this movie deserves the hype. I think it's pretty good. There are certainly times where this movie tends to be a little bit ridiculous, and it's kind of asking you to not think too much. It's one of those kind of movies where you need to turn your brain off at sometimes, but I think it's a little bit more logically coherent than most movies in this genre. And there were times where I was wondering, okay, well, why did this character do that? And then that would get answered shortly after, and I'd be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Of course, a action movie like this with this plot, it's unrealistic. However, within that, I think this movie is very entertaining. We get some very good performances from Jason Bateman and Taron Egerton. Egerton killed this role. He was excellent as the TSA agent. I thought he was just phenomenal. There were times where he was going through a lot of stress in this film, where his character was scared, and you felt the emotions. And I thought that was great. That was awesome. I thought there were a lot of plot twists in this movie that were done really well. I liked that. There's one scene in this movie where there's a fight between two people in a car that is really cool, in my opinion. I know a lot of people on Twitter have been criticizing the movie for that scene because it clearly involved a lot of CGI, but the way it was shot was really cool. I thought it was creative. I really enjoyed it. I thought that was a risk the movie took, and I liked it. And I thought it was creative and original. At least I thought so. I hadn't really seen anything like it, and for me, I thought it was really cool. But yeah, this movie was great. The acting was awesome. Jason Bateman is so good at playing comedic characters and also playing serious characters. And even when he is playing serious characters, it's almost difficult for him to not be funny. There are some lines in this movie that he says that are like legitimately funny, and he's playing a bad guy, and he's just such a funny actor. And there are times where he delivers a line that may not be purposefully comedic, but because of the way that he delivers it, it becomes funny. And so I always like that, and that I like that from him, and that does show up in this movie. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I didn't like about the movie, and there really isn't. The only complaint I had is that there are certainly times, especially at the end of this movie, where things are happening that are just a bit too ridiculous. And of course, there are times where you need to just cut your brain off when watching a movie. But even considering that, there were a few things happening where I was like, all right, this is a little bit crazy. Egerton's character is a TSA agent, but he leaves where he's supposed to be so much in this movie, and it's almost distracting at times. It's like, all right, like, I don't know how he would be able to do this without getting fired on the spot. It's kind of crazy. And so like stuff like that happens, and it's just like, all right, like that's a little bit ridiculous. Or at the end of the movie, he gets on a plane in a way that is just too ridiculous to like not notice and not think about. That was kind of crazy, but overall, thought this was a good film, very enjoyable, great acting. A very interesting, gripping story that's made sense. I thought this movie was, like I said earlier, was more logically consistent than a lot of movies in this genre, which is nice to see. And yeah, I think if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you go watch it. It's a very good movie. I think it's worth your time. Very entertaining. And it's getting a lot of hype, and I think it deserves it. I really liked it. And I think it's a good time for anyone looking to see a movie, a Christmas movie with some action, kind of like a Die Hard film. But those are my thoughts on Carry On. And yeah, great film. Go watch it. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. Don't forget the reason for the season, the birth of Jesus Christ. Today was a very fun episode to record, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a like and subscribe. That would help me out a lot. And if you're listening on audio on whatever podcast or whatever platform you use to listen to your podcast, whether that be Spotify or Apple Music, if you would leave me a 5-star review, that would help me out as well. Like I said, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see y'all next time. Peace.